Greetings, ladies, gentlemen, and gamers of the jury. It's Alex, a lawyer who loves games. And on the docket for today is a preliminary hearing, or my initial impressions, on Mecha BREAK. For a quick rundown, get ready for a lot of buzzwords, but Mecha BREAK is an upcoming multiplayer, free-to-play, mecha PvP, class-based shooter. So please bear with me. I know these are kind of red flag words, but I promise it's better than it sounds, but it plays kind of like Overwatch X Armored Core. The core of the game, pun intended, are multiplayer objective-based matches, kind of like Overwatch again, like there's a push mode for instance. So I'm sure some of you are hearing Overwatch, free-to-play, hero shooter, and hearing those as complete red flags, which is understandable. Those are super saturated markets with obvious problems. But Mecha BREAK executes its gameplay ideas very well, and I think it elevates itself above the rest of the hero shooter crowd. So I'll discuss what I like about Mecha BREAK first, which boils down to the most important things. The actual gameplay is super fun and very unique compared to the normal hero shooter. The mechs themselves are all awesome, and customization is really excellent. I also think, as someone less familiar with mech PvP multiplayer games, that Mecha BREAK is a great entry point both into the hero shooter world, if other hero shooters have put you off, and it's really easy to get into as a mecha game because the gameplay is very smooth and fluid, and the overall mission structure will probably be very familiar to you if you've played other hero shooters. Next, I'll talk about some of the things I hope are improved by the game's actual release, and last, I'll discuss things that I think could sink the entire game. Even if the gameplay is fantastic, I think certain aspects of the free-to-play model could completely ruin the experience, which would be a shame because I think this game has the most potential of a multiplayer game I've played in a long time. I also want to make it clear early that I'm really coming into this as a mecha novice. I think giant robots are cool as hell, just like the next guy, but I'm woefully behind on the mecha game scene. I've really only played Armored Core 6, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Best action game of the year last year. But that's it, unless you count Transformers the movie for PSP, which I don't really think is a proper mecha game. But I can tell you that I was totally sucked in as a newcomer. I think this is a really good entry point for the genre and just a really good time, even if you're not immersed in this genre. But if you're watching and are more of an expert than me, have played a lot of PvE mecha games, please, if I say anything that's wrong or you have anything to add about balancing, how this compares to other mecha games, that's experience I really can't offer in this video. So please speak up in the comments. I'd love to hear it. So like I already said, what I like the most about the game is the central gameplay. In an age of samey, game-as-a-service, hero shooters, I found Mecha BREAK to be a true breath of fresh air. It certainly takes things that work in the space of the hero shooter genre. It does so without ever sacrificing what really makes a mecha game great, and that's the mecha power fantasy. And it really nails that. Like, throughout the game, you certainly feel like you're stomping around in a giant robot, or not really stomping, but more boosting around, because you move very fast. The only point of comparison I really have for this is Armored Core 6, but I think the movement in Armored Core 6 is some of the best movement in a video game I've ever played. And I think the Mecha BREAK already feels pretty damn close to that. So there's 13 total mechas. Some in here are faster than others. There's two actually, that transform into basically jet planes like Starscream. And controlling them is super fun. But even with the heaviest mechas, or I should say strikers, you're still going to be blasting around really fast. And I found the basic combat to be really tight no matter what class I was playing, as in it was very almost like Halo-esque in that regenerating shields are huge and using your abilities well to maximize your damage both for shields and armor is everything. Each striker has predetermined weapons and abilities as well that fit very clearly into a kit. I think each one was very intuitive in what kind of class it was and what kind of role it plays. And all of the tools and weapons felt to me, again, I don't have the pulse on what's, the most balanced in these types of games, but they all felt balanced and strong to me. And when you're playing a striker well, playing the objective, really helping your team, utilizing your kit to the fullest, it feels really, really good. Like, for example, the Welkin has an ability where it creates a box-like shield that traps opponents, and it also has a very strong axe for close quarters. So managing to trap a weaker opponent and slash them to pieces with your axe and totally destroy them feels so good. And that's just one of many playstyles here. There's the classic Gundam all-rounder like energy sword and assault rifle type striker. There's defensive focused strikers that transform into turrets. And there's even support strikers that are much more focused on on keeping allies alive. All 13 strikers have weapons that feel powerful and abilities that all feel useful. Some abilities are clearly very useful for countering certain other archetypes. Like for example, there's a claw that grabs fast enemies out of the air. There's a disruptor that reveals cloaked enemies and decoys. Like there's all sorts of like tactical counters. And yeah, there really wasn't a single striker that I played and thought, wow, this doesn't feel useful at all. Everything felt very strong. I'm not going to do a deep dive into all the strikers right now, but I do plan to drop a video soon ranking all 13 strikers, so stay tuned for that. But I think it's incredibly impressive that in a playtest, not even the full release of the game, which I don't think actually has a release date yet. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But even as of this early playtest stage, Mecha BREAK has really tight core gameplay that feels super fresh. And in the multiplayer shooter genre, that's everything. I think Mecha BREAK, because the hero shooter is so popular, really has a chance of breaking out, you see what I did there, as a sleeper hit. Sure, the mecha genre is kind of niche, but Armored Core last year did great and really brought the genre back to the forefront. So I got totally sucked in as someone who really doesn't follow mecha games, so I would highly recommend checking this out if you're into hero shooters, multiplayer shooters, if you think giant robots are cool, or even if you're totally sick of hero shooters or don't really like those games normally, but really like mecha. It's accessible in that it's a multiplayer game with recognizable aspects from other hero shooters. So if you're into those types of games and want to check out mecha stuff, it's not that huge of a jump. But at the same time, it feels completely fresh compared to those types of games, or at least it does for me. So it's a nice blend of new and familiar that's both comfortable, but also really exciting. The other major aspect of the game that really impressed me is its customization, although there are some caveats with the customization, particularly the mech customization. But actually, the very first thing that Mecha BREAK has you do, which is surprising, is customize your human pilot. There's tons of options, they get very minute, and it also very clearly caters to a certain anime fan base, which makes sense. It's a mecha game. Mecha anime is huge. But just prepare yourself for some very fan servicey sliders. Like, I've never seen more butt sliders in a game. So there's also a lot of physics, so make of that what you will. If that's not your thing, it's there. Just be aware of that. If it is your thing, you're gonna have a field day, I guess. The customization for the mechs also looks really good in that there's all sorts of granularity for how you can paint them, for putting decals on them, so that's super cool. And something I should have mentioned earlier is that the mechs look fantastic. I think, you know, and I'm looking at this with a very untrained eye, but all of these mechs could be straight out of Gundam to me. Like, they all look super cool, they look distinctive. Like, you can really tell that, like, for example, Falcon, the flyer, the super fast one, is super sleek. Nirakami looks exactly how you'd expect a cloaking sniper that flies around to look. And I could go on, and again, I plan to in my video where I rank all the different strikers, but for now, I'll just leave it at the design work is really amazing. Like, I could see my friends who are into Gundam, who buy Gunpla, actually like going to a store and buying the Strikepla models. So I think Mecha BREAK gets the most important things right, but there's certainly still room for improvement. It's not perfect, in fact, far from it. It is kind of difficult to tell how much content will be in the main game. There were certain modes that were totally grayed out here. I don't know if those will come with a lot of extra content, but there weren't that many maps in the game, and each map is its own mode basically. So that's a little bit concerning, but that's something we'll just have to wait and see with the actual launch if that improves. I was playing Mecha BREAK on PC, so I can speak to that from a technical standpoint. It's very stable, never crashed a single time. The matchmaking was very responsive and quick. I never had to wait too long for a match, and once I was in, there was never any lag. But optimization wasn't the greatest. I will say my PC's mostly pretty good, but the CPU is sometimes a bottleneck, and that was definitely the case with this game. Let me know in the comments how well it performed for you guys. I had to turn the settings to low, but once it was on low, it was very smooth, hovering probably around like 40 to 50 FPS. Obviously, with this type of game, you want it to run smoothly, 60 FPS or more, but on higher graphics settings, I had some pretty serious frame dips, and it just wasn't having it, even though I have a strong GPU. A very small but really important problem I have with Mecha BREAK is that it does not put its best foot forward at all at the start of the game. Mecha BREAK begins with a tutorial mission and all sorts of cutscenes that are extremely generic, very cringy, I would say, in terms of voice acting.
What's this new toy? Got a name?
Name's Elysinus, the latest BREAK striker, beefed up with extra armor.
They throw out all kinds of world building, like jargon.
Pyrogenesis. Nice. Freezeness initiated. Mind projection system activated. Injecting EIC particles.
And it just really doesn't fit. It's unnecessary. It's very cliche. And then the game throws you into a PvE tutorial mission where you fight a bunch of just completely fodder bots and eventually fight a boss, but it's all really easy. It really teaches you nothing about the game. Like, it teaches you the most basic aspects of movement maybe, and then leaves out the explanation for all sorts of important mechanics for the actual multiplayer, so it doesn't prepare you adequately for the multiplayer. It honestly put me off a bit. I almost didn't keep playing. I was thinking, okay, this just feels lame and generic. And I could see a lot of players playing that first mission and being like, okay, this isn't for me, when it's not representative of the game whatsoever. Mecha BREAK is a PvP multiplayer shooter, and having this really weird, awkward PvE segment first just makes no sense. It was also really confusing because the next thing the game does is launch you into a multiplayer match, and it's not really clear about that at all. It's just a really weird, jarring way to start off new players that doesn't prepare them for the multiplayer and shows some really undercooked aspects of things that the game isn't trying to be at all. The multiplayer space is so flooded, you need to hook players right away, and this opening segment has the exact opposite effect. On a related note, I also think the game has a pretty severe lack of tutorials. This opening segment, like I said, really teaches you nothing, and then you're just thrown into the deep end. There are explanations you can find of the weapons with like pretty helpful videos of what they do. And there's challenges, but the challenges, which you'd assume would serve as tutorials for how to use your mech, felt really imbalanced. Like, I got my ass completely kicked in one of them, and I just found the scenario completely impossible. Another problem, the menus are a total mess. They're a pain to wade through. The animations when you switch between different menus are a little choppy. There's just too much going on in them, and they are not fun to wade through. As to gameplay, I've already played my hand that I think the gameplay is very good, but I think there are a few specific areas for improvement. My biggest problem with the gameplay is that there's no actual way to switch strikers once you're in a game. The only time you're actually strategizing around what striker to play as is in the pregame lobby, where you can see what your team strikers are, so you can at least try to make a well-balanced team, but you can't see what the enemy team strikers are. And if your opponents pick certain strikers that you don't have counters for, that can be a huge problem. Like, let's say you don't have anything fast enough or with cloaking counters to deal with a Nurikami, the invisible sniper. That's just going to tear your team apart, and it's going to be really unfun to fight against. Obviously, allowing players to switch mid-match will make for a little bit more of a chaotic game that's more focused around counter picks and stuff. But I also think that makes for a more strategic, fluid game with a lot more to consider as you're playing the game, like whether or not to switch roles. And I think that'll mean a lot less frustration when you end up in a match that's completely one-sided because you don't have the counter that you need. I think there's also room for improvement in the game UI for certain modes and for support. Like in the push mode, it's pretty unclear which point is yours. You have to really look at the colors on the little icons. I think support is really strong from what I played. I feel like I made a huge difference when I was playing support and healing my team and keeping everyone alive. But I also feel like my teammates didn't even know what I was doing. So making the UI for support more obvious where allies need healing, or making it more obvious when you're being healed by support, I think would go a long way. There are weather mechanics in the game, or I should say a weather mechanic, because as far as I can tell, there was only one. Please correct me if I'm wrong and you saw other stuff. There's a pulse storm / EIC type weather mechanic where it basically shuts down everything about your mech's targeting UI. It sucks. It's not fun at all. A lot of mech abilities that are completely reliant on it are completely shut down. It just makes for a minute where you're basically flailing around trying to tell what's friend from foe. You're either just shooting at anything that moves or examining your minimap with a magnifying glass. And last, like I've already said, the collision detection is just funky. It especially matters when you're playing the Falcon. Like, it's really easy to get caught on terrain, and it just feels quite a bit off and needs some work. My major worries about the game can be summed up in 3 words: free to play. It's pretty difficult to tell how much of an impact the free to play aspect will have on the game, because during the playtest, the game just threw currency at you enough to unlock everything, even all the paints and stuff. On one hand, I really appreciate that the developers let you run loose in the playtest and experiment with everything. On the other hand, this does lead to the worry that the game's free to play aspects could go very mask off once the game's actually released, and could really derail the entire experience. I think it's possible that the developers were being a little insidious about hiding the ball when it comes to monetization, and it'll be really bad when it releases. But for now, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. The game's fun. We'll see. There's already a lot of currencies in the game. It's hard to tell what does what. There's a battle pass filled to the absolute brim with loot boxes, and after every match you have to wade through tons of loot that you get, and it takes forever just to get to the next match. Opening up all the loot boxes that I got from just playing the game was really not a fun experience. You're just sitting around getting meaningless loot. One of the things locked behind the loot boxes is mech paint, as in like coloring your mech. I think that's going to be a huge problem when the game releases if those aren't just really easy to get, because people love modeling their mechs after like Gundams and stuff, or making their own designs, and if that's just totally hamstrung by not being able to paint them how you want, people are going to hate that. Also, I'm pretty worried that unlocking mechs could be a grind. I think that in this type of class-based game, just having everything be available immediately is really important for balancing. Like we saw how Overwatch locking heroes behind a paywall at the start of Overwatch 2 went down. It was very negative. Both players hated it, and it led to a lot of bad press. Locking strikers behind paywalls, I think, will be the same exact problem. Even if it really doesn't take too much grinding to get, it will make for an experience where if you're coming in as a new player who doesn't have a lot of mechs, especially as the game goes on, if a lot more are added, especially powerful ones potentially, it could be pretty miserable starting with just the starter mechs and getting stomped, or say not being able to counter other strong mechs. The other big thing in the loot boxes I saw was mods, and it's a system I could totally do without. So the mods offer some sort of small buff and small nerf, but it's all real nitty-gritty percentage stuff that, at least for me, just was not fun to engage with at all. I could see how this system could appeal to certain people who want to make builds, but I think it's a poor fit for the game. This is otherwise a game where you have a very set kit, so I think it makes for just imbalance. Either the mods will have a big effect, which means that the game will be poorly balanced, or they'll have basically no effect, which means that there's no point to them. And regardless, I really did not think it was a fun system to engage with. You have to wade through so many little stats to figure out what you want. Plus, you can only apply a mod to one mech at a time, so you have to go through other menus to actually take it back off one mech to put it on another mech, and it was just a huge pain. Maybe I'm missing something about it. Please let me know in the comments, how strong you thought that the mod system was, if you enjoyed it. I did not. To be fair, the developers did say that this would not be a pay-to-win game. Hopefully that's true, but I think the mod system brings with it a whole host of possible balance issues, especially people that pay to just blow their way through season passes really quick and buy a ton of loot boxes. And I think that unlocking mechs, especially if you're able to unlock mechs quicker by paying, will make it pay to win in terms of substance. And even if it's not pay to win, like even if the grind to get new mechs isn't a huge deal, or that the mod system isn't a big deal either, it's still probably going to be pay to paint your mech, and that still sucks. I do understand that, game development is costly, it takes a lot of time, so they need to recoup their investment, but I think that a poor progression here, or having players start off on a weaker foot, especially as the game goes on, will be a huge problem. Really, I think this is a problem that would be solved by just selling the game, instead of having it be free to play where a bunch of stuff is locked behind really unsatisfying progressions. Just let people buy the game. $20, $30 is probably fair, maybe a little more, maybe a little bit less, but once you're in, all the mechs are available. I can still see all kinds of, chances for them to hook whales with the pilot customization. They can still sell that stuff. Maybe add some other mech customizations that aren't the paint, because that's a really cheap thing to nickel and dime. But I think the free-to-play aspects of this game are going to be possibly a real anchor if they're poorly implemented, and one that could totally kill the game. Something that I think this game has so much potential, and it would be a real shame to see. Will Mecha BREAK be worth your time when it finally comes out? I think that's a very good question. As it stands right now, I think gameplay-wise, the answer is already a very obvious yes. It's just a total blast to play. It's so refreshing in the space it's in, and it's a great way to get into mecha games if they're not really your thing and you're interested. Really what the question boils down to for me with this game is when the game actually drops and free-to-play rears its ugly head, will it be a kitten or will it be a lion? Will it ruin the game, or will the game still be really fun with a very manageable grind? I think this game truly has potential to be one of the next big things. It's just really up to the developers if they want to shoot themselves in the foot with greed. As to other videos on my docket, I plan to drop my full review for Paper Mario soon. That's been cooking for a while. And I plan to come out with a full ranking of all the strikers as of the playtest. So stay tuned for those. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, like, subscribe, and with that, court is adjourned.